everybody. Welcome to the AI Masterclass in Recruitment 2021. We're delighted to have this class for you today. I would first of all really like to thank the sponsors, and I mean that most sincerely, that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to put this on. So thank you so much to impress.ai, who's made this possible today and given me the time and resources to develop this masterclass for you all. We're going to kick off in a minute, all about recruitment in masterclass. As I said earlier, if you didn't hear me, we're expecting up to 100 people online today, so lots of interest in this topic and subject. So if you can stay on mute, maybe put things in the chat, that would be great. So I will just let a few more people in and we can begin. So hopefully you can see my slides. Shout out if you can't. And as I said, we'll be watching the chat if you want to put comments or questions in there. We do have a range of people joining us today. I did look at the delegate list, and we've got people from, you know, HR directors, recruiters, heads of TA, data analysts. So we've got a real range of people coming in. And so we are going to talk about AI. We're going to go into a bit of detail. We will get a little bit technical, but not too technical. So if you feel like you're getting lost, don't worry. We'll move through that section, and it won't be too techy for you. So let's begin. Now, I always like to start a class, if you like, with a why. Why are we here? What do you want to get out of the class? So again, feel free to pop that in the chat. I think it's important, you know, one, to recognize this is a masterclass, so it's a bit more than a webinar that's normally an hour and, you know, a bit of light touch. This will be you know, a bit more of a deep dive for everyone, and as I said, we're going to cover a range of topics. I'll get to the agenda in a minute. I do like to ask participants there, why are you here? Often I think, you know, with this type of class, your answers will probably be know-how. You know, I want to learn more about AI, particularly AI in recruitment. It might be about fear. I don't know this stuff. I should know this stuff. I'm in HR. I need to know more about this stuff to do my job better. It might be about the marketplace. You know, I want to know more about the products, what's out there. Things that are very topical at the moment around AI is ethics. You know, what are the ethics in AI? And bias. What about the bias in the data? What about bias in people? Can I trust the AI as a tool? So the good news is we're going to be talking about all those things today. And we'll work through that. The other thing I'm really delighted about with the format of this masterclass is we've got a panel at the end, so please do stick around to the end. We've got Dan Sherrington and Sudhanshu from impress.ai. Now, Sud is the CEO, but he's also the chief data scientist. So I feel really pleased that we could get him here today, and he's going to be around to answer any questions, and I'm going to throw a few curly questions at him as well, so we can do some deep dives around the AI and the data. So that's my why. I'll give you a few other reasons why I think AI in recruitment is so important at the moment. So looking at the current talent acquisition function, I'm sure a lot of people in the room will be familiar with this. We've had a huge development in HR tech over the last 10 years, more so in the last 5 years. But just, you know, a couple of substantial changes like ATSs, so applicant tracking systems, and job boards has meant we've created a lot more paperwork for ourselves. We get a lot more applicants, we've got a lot more processes, and overall in the last few years recruitment's got very costly. It's actually got quite slower despite all the technology. I've got some, Gartner research to say, it's taken us too long to process all these candidates and get back to people and answer questions or give them a good experience. So, often candidates have a poor experience. Line managers are getting frustrated because it takes so long. So that's just a bit of kind of local context. Looking at the global disruption, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, but as I say, I do like to set the scene on, before we do the deep dive into the AI and the tools, why is it important for recruitment and TA right now? Look, disruption is here. Digital impact is massive. Again, the last few years, everything can now be done on a phone, mobile devices. We've never had data like we've got it now. If you think back, computers used to be the size of a house back in the 50s. Now we can get the same amount of data on a little microchip. So just that data power and the fact that we've got so much data that we've never had before, all these touch points, social media, information on candidates, etc. That's a huge impact for us all. The gig economy, more people have got more than one job. We're onboarding more people. We're offboarding more people. We're working with people who aren't our employees. They're not on our payroll. So again, this impacts how we take people on, how we hire people, how we recruit people, how we track them. Globalization, I've definitely seen it in my lifetime. I've been recruiting since the late 80s, early 90s, my career in HR. Look, never before I might be looking in Australia, but I'd equally now be looking in India or across the globe for the next specialist or person I'm hiring for. Changing social values, I think this is a real big one. I put this down to your candidate expectations. So if they can book an airline ticket in a few minutes, if they can, get insurance online or on their phone with a few simple clicks, why can't they get a job that easy? And so actually it puts a lot of pressure that the candidate's expectations are a lot greater now. Candidate experience is key. Your candidates are your customers. And so how do we make applying for a job, going through the process of screening and evaluation as painless and as easy and as integrated as possible? The good news is the tools are out there and the AI is there to help us. I've just covered that point. Employee experience is king. Novel partnerships, again, we've seen this share economy rise. Things like Uber, things like Airbnb. Who would have thought we'd let strangers into our houses and come and stay with us and pay money a few years ago? So again, the world's really shifted. And the last one I just added on there is post-COVID, the new normal. I mean, I know COVID's not over for a lot of the world, but equally, people are used to working from home. People are used to hopping on Zoom calls. People are maybe not returning to the office, or they are returning to the office, or some people will be in the office and others won't. So again, it all impacts on the recruitment team, the TA function, candidates. Those who heard me speak last year, we did a webinar with Coles. I think they went from in-store recruitment, which was very manual, paper-based, that interviewed candidates in a little room in a shopping supermarket, and they had to pivot, and they went literally to 19,000 applications in a month, and they did it all online, and they did all their assessment online and all their candidate processing online. So the world has certainly changed. I know I don't need to remind you, but I just thought it was a good scene setting before we get into the AI. A little bit more about me. So before you think, oh, Rachel's probably a IT whiz and she's been doing this for years. No, I've been doing recruitment for years. As I mentioned, I've been in recruitment since the late 80s, early 90s. I wasn't born with a mobile phone in my hand. We had a fax machine and a filing cabinet. So my version of HR is very manual, very paper-based. I've come up that way. A few years ago, I went out on my own and started my consulting business, and a lot of it's about recruitment improvement and the recruitment function and how we transition. But increasingly in the last 10 years, and even more so in the last 5 years, it's been all about technology. So how do you transform? Well, a lot of it's HR tech. There's so many recruitment tools out there. You can probably tell I'm really passionate about this. I actually love HR tech. I love the tools. My mantra is, if I can do it, you can do it, because as I say, I haven't got an IT degree. I'm not a data scientist. I do have a lot of product demos. I see some really, really cool tools out there. There's pretty much tools for everything. So whatever you're looking for, it's probably out there and already built. But if I can do it, so can you. So breathe deeply and embrace. And automate the mundane. So there's a lot of HR, there's a lot of recruitment that is paperwork. You know, how do we process 600 CVs? How do we telephone screen that many people? Or how do we test that many people? How do we file that many people? How do we record their results? So there's a lot of administration or mundane in the process that we can automate, and we can also make it better. So that time that frees up, we can add to the human touch. And as I said, I was definitely not born with a mobile phone in my hand. And if I can do it, you can do it. And if I can learn this stuff, you can learn this stuff. So it's fairly straightforward. Just a few of my clients, just to mention, as I said earlier, a lot of what I do is about transition. So these are a few of the people I've worked with in the last probably 3 to 4 years. Big corporates, often looking at their TA function, often going in and helping them transform, and often helping them assist from the manual and the automative through to technology and a centralized TA function, or a more automated process, and bringing in a new HR tech stack. So that's what I do these days. Today's agenda. So let's kick off. We've looked at the why. Why is it important? Why do we need to consider AI? Why do we need to look at these tools? So today I'm going to run you through what is AI and do my best job at explaining that to you. And we're going to look at the different types of AI and AI-powered tools in recruitment. We're going to look at how it works, how to avoid bias and ensure diversity and inclusion. We'll look at ethics in AI as well. We'll also touch on the candidate experience. You know, there's a lot of fear out there about, oh, I don't want to be interviewed by a robot, or what would a robot know? Or if we leave this experience to a robot or a piece of AI or a piece of code, the candidate's going to have a terrible experience. So I know there's a lot of fear there, so we'll look at that as well. We'll look at the benefits and ROI of AI if you're developing a business case, if you're looking to introduce a tool. We can certainly help with that as well. And right the way through to, you know, what are good questions to ask if you've got a new vendor and they're offering you some recruitment technology with AI or a chatbot. What are the good questions to ask, particularly around ethics and data bias? So we'll look at that as well, how to appoint your vendor, how to establish that project. And at the end, the last 30 minutes, we're going to open up to panel discussion and questions. So do stick around for that, because that'll be fascinating. And as I said, we've got Sud, who's not only the CEO of impress.ai, he's also their chief data scientist. So, you know, he's going to get some curly ones today. I can feel it. So let's move on with the agenda. I'll start by trying to define what is AI. As I said, we do want to make this interactive. So please pop your comments into chat. Andrea's kindly assisting me, and she'll let me know what the questions are. And we'll try and stop at each section as well and have a little chat and take it from there. But to begin with, I'll try and define AI for you. So there is no one definition. But this is what I've come up with. So what is AI? So AI stands for artificial intelligence. It's really the ability of a computer or a robot. Remember, those robots are basically controlled by computers to do a task that's normally done by humans. So it's called artificial intelligence. It might be something like sort this list, or find me somebody who looks like this, or go and see if there's some kind of correlation between people in the top jobs and degree results, or, you know, so anything a human used to do that we used to do manual, we can potentially create a piece of artificial intelligence that will do that for us. There's also, so artificial intelligence is just a branch of computer science. And you know, it's talking about, are machines intelligent? I'll come on to that later, because we also like this term about machine learning. So what is machine learning? How is that different from AI? Well, machine learning is a part of AI. So AI is the big field, which is basically, let's get a computer to do a task that used to be done by a human. It might be sorting CVs, it might be ranking candidates into a list, it might be scoring somebody on a test. Machine learning is where, I guess it's one step on from that, which is where the machine learns from that data. So there might be a pattern or a correlation. So, for example, they might say, you know, we found a pattern that people who've been in sales for more than 5 years make good sales leaders, or people with great communication skills make good leaders, and there'll be some form of pattern, and then they can go and look for that in the data or in the applicants or in the CV, and come back and say, yep, we found these people, they're a good fit against that job description, or they're a good fit against these competencies that we've tested against. So really, the machine extrapolates the data, finds patterns in the data. You've probably also heard of an algorithm. Again, you might think, I don't know what an algorithm is. An algorithm is just a piece of code. It's basically a bit of computer programming. It's telling the computer what to do. You know, if this, do that. You know, if you find them, put them in here. If they look like this, you put them over there. So really, algorithms are just all part of AI and machine learning. They're just pieces of code that we might use as part of that process. The field of AI is really broad. It's actually broader than machine learning. So machine learning is where you take that data and information and correlations and touch points and say, can we formulate a pattern here? Can we extrapolate from that? But we're going to go on to talk about this a bit more. But this is about as techie as it gets. So don't worry. We're not going to get much more techie than this. And I guess the other big thing to know is it's evolving rapidly. There's been huge developments in the last 10 years. There's even been huge developments in the last, I'd say, 2 years. I was reading a report as part of research for putting together this masterclass. And, you know, we've got Josh Burson just 2 years ago saying AI is becoming more mainstream. Well, it is mainstream, you know, it's here. Within 2 years, we've gone from probably very little in recruitment to huge amounts in recruitment, and within your ATS and within your screening, within your psych testing, within your careers website, within your chatbots. And so now it is becoming mainstream. So where do you see artificial intelligence? Again, some of you might know this already, some of you might not realise this is what it's called and this is what we're seeing. So good examples, you'll have seen this, and at the moment I'm not looking at recruitment, I'm just looking across industry and everywhere in life. Manufacturing, you know, we've all seen the car factories with robots, with robotic arms. We've seen you know, the Amazon warehouse where things are packed by a robot or a computer, self-driving cars, Tesla, you know, that's all examples of artificial intelligence. It's where we've created code via algorithms. We've told the computer to do something. You know, with the self-driving car, it might be if you see another vehicle, slow down. If you see a stop sign, you stop. And so all that coding goes into the machine, as it were, or the product. We've got smart assistants. You'll all be chatting to your phone and talking to Siri. That's AI. You know, it's used in healthcare, it's used in disease mapping and geno, it's used in financial investment. You know, if the shares reach this price, buy at this stage. When you're booking travel, you know, anything, you're booking an airline ticket or a hotel, it might pop up and say, these are the ones available. Would you like to look at some others in that price range, in that location? Would you like to order on your Uber menu the same meal that you had before? That's all AI. So it's all around us. It's in every industry. It's in everything we do. We're already using it. Especially on social media, you know, it might say, if you like these tweets, you might want to follow these people, or your Netflix might come up and say, we know you like these movies, here's some more movies you might like. So again, the data and the algorithms are constantly doing machine learning and saying, well, if there's a pattern here, then we can extrapolate that you might be good at that, or you might like this, or you might want that. I just thought I'd put this on as a bit of fun, and also just to kind of get your head around AI as well. So the AI is only as good as the algorithms that's put in. The AI is only as good as the data. So we do still need to tell the machine. So even though we call it machine learning, that machine is not as good as a human brain. It doesn't make, you know, random connections. It doesn't have a gut feel. It will only follow its coding. And so, for example, if we coded into a machine, go find me a flower, and we could tell it what a flower looks like. So we could say they've got a stem and some petals and a center, and, you know, they've got pollen. And so away it could go to find us lots of flowers. Now, this might be the case with a candidate. In recruitment, we might say, find me a unicorn. In Australia, a unicorn is a term we use that you know, you're searching for that elusive candidate that's got all the skills, and, you know, we can't find them. We might want to use a web spider, which is a piece of AI in recruitment that goes off and looks around the world for NASA astronauts or something like that. Bit the same here. We're saying, find me a flower. It's got petals, it's got leaves, it's got a center, it's colored. But hang on, what about these things at the bottom? Are they flowers? Well, yeah, they are. You know, I think we've got a passion flower there. I think we've got I think they're called bird of prey or exotic from Tenerife there. Some Australian flora there. What about hand-drawn flowers? What about 2D flowers? Will the computer still recognize them as flowers? And so this is where we might have to change our coding, or say, actually, these are flowers as well. And at the moment, they're ignoring those. So we need to help the computer, help the algorithms, adjust the algorithms so we see all flowers and not just a certain type of flower, which again is, you know, you can relate that back to candidates and maybe bias creeping in, and how do we make sure we view all the people that we want to see and include all the people we want to see, and that does come back to your algorithms and your coding, and also your data sets, which I'll talk about in a minute. The different types of AI. Now, these definitions are evolving all the time, but if you talk to data scientists and people in this field, so this is broader again than just HR and recruitment. There's three general types of what we call artificial intelligence: narrow or weak, and that's one type; general or strong, that's another type; and artificial super intelligence, which is the third. Now, this is very current speak. If you go online and look at Bernard Marr, he does a lot of articles on AI on LinkedIn. So he's writing about this right now in literally May 2021, and people are starting to talk about narrow and weak AI, or general and strong. So I'll just define those for you as well. Weak and narrow AI is intelligent human behavior, which allows the machines to solve complex problems. That's where we are now. So actually AI right now, today, 2021, is called weak and narrow AI. And there's a reason for this, is because we know we're going to go a long way with it. So somebody described it to me this week as, this is kind of dial up, you know, the old, you used to have to send a fax machine, or you have to dial up to get your, it might be too old for some people online, but to actually get your internet connection. And whereas the future of AI is, you know, somewhere like 5G. So where we are now, it's pretty good. It does a lot of stuff. But when you talk to the data scientists, it's actually classed as weak or narrow, because we know we're not there yet, but this is where we are right now. The next level is strong or general AI. Again, this is actually hypothetical. We're not actually there yet. This is saying when the computers can think the same as a human brain and make those connections and jump that gap, so they go beyond their programming, that will be strong general AI. And then the super intelligence, and this is, you know, part of the sci-fi movies where the computer and the robot takes over the world, and they always gain consciousness. And so it's more than even a brain, you know, they develop feelings and a soul and consciousness because their thoughts are the same as a human, and they ultimately often overthrow the human race. That's what we call artificial super intelligence. So strong and general AI is not here yet. It's hypothetical. Artificial super intelligence is not here yet. It's hypothetical. So the one we're actually dealing with is weak and narrow. But that doesn't mean to say it's not really impressive and it can't do a lot of things, but it's still not as good as a human brain. It's still not thinking on its own. It is restricted by the data, and it's restricted by the algorithms and the coding. It can only do what the coding asks it to do. It can't kind of think outside the box, as it were. So I'll just finish on this note, and then I might just see if we can, you know, get some questions from people if they want to pop a question in the chat or unmute. But I'll just wrap up on this section about what is AI. So even though we call it narrow, it's doing all these amazing things already. So that the top one, 10 Gia, I think is how we pronounce it. That's a robot that sits on your desk and interviews you, or can interview your candidates. Bottom left there, we've got AI with a sense of smell. I mean, imagine that you've programmed a computer to recognize different smells. I mean, that just kind of blows my mind. Kimset in the middle is facial recognition and makes facials. So that's kind of a robotic, but it's learned all the human expressions. And Sophia, you might have come across before. She's a very lifelike robot. You can literally interview her and have a conversation. So she's got, you know, that much AI and programming in her that she's able to have a very human conversation with you, even though it's really coding. So what I might do is I might just pause the share for now and see if I can get to the chat and just see if we've got any questions.
Hi, Rachel. Let me help you there. There's no questions in the chat at the moment. But just to follow on from that last slide, the robot at the top is called Tengai, and I actually met Tengai when I was in the UK back when we could travel, and interviewed with it. An amazing experience. I actually think it has some real validity once you get over the strangeness of having this head sitting there with a video programmed onto it that is genderless, that has no facial changes when it asks you the questions, because we all know as people, if we like something, we have tells when we're interviewing that lets the person know that what they're saying is good. So they keep talking like that. Tengai just is a blank face, no reaction, and you're chatting away to it and getting no reaction. but a brilliant piece of software. They were going to come out to one of our events last year, but we shut our borders.
So thank you. But for those who joined late, and I know a few of you did, feel free to pop questions in the chat. Andrea is kindly helping me today and will feed me the questions, and we have got our panel on standby as well, and should hear our Chief Data Scientist and CEO of Impress. So we'll try and fill the questions, so feel free to interact and put the questions in, and I'll continue with the presentation. So just bear with me. I'd better share my screen first. Here we go. So let's get back to it. Sorry, because of that pause, I will just zoom ahead. So we've looked at AI, we've looked at different types of AI across industry, we've looked at how the coding works, and we've also looked at some recent definitions of weak and narrow, strong and general, or artificial super. And it is quite impressive. So although it's called narrow, it can do a lot. There's a lot of powerful stuff out there. And I think what's important is that, you know, there's been a massive rise in these tools for recruitment. So, you know, and I think we're going to start talking about bias and ethics and things like that in a short while. I think the recruitment industry and those vendors that I've seen and are dealing with, they're super cool tools. They're better than these general AI or general things, and they do have a lot of inbuilt, I guess, you know, things around privacy or things around data quality or data sets to avoid bias. But we'll come on to that. So just in summary of AI then, you know, the pros and cons, I guess what we've learned so far is it is a tool. It is just a tool. It's very data driven. It uses that data to make decisions. You know, it's run by algorithms. If the algorithms are wrong or the data's wrong, then, you know, you might get some strange results. So you've got to take great care there that your tool or your vendor has set it up in the right way. And we're going to come on to that in a minute. It greatly speeds up the time to process large amounts of data. So I can definitely say from a user myself and someone, as I said, you know, I've come from recruitment from the 1990s. Look, you can interview 600 people in one day via a chatbot. You know, you can get through your whole grad scheme in 5 days, including tests and psychometrics, and the people still have a great experience. So it's really powerful stuff in terms of what we can do and how we can process people. And it's not just for bulk recruitment or just for, say, grad recruitment, and we'll come on to that as well. Humans are actually really poor decision makers. So we think we're good. And although I said, you know, a robot will never, or a piece of AI will never overcome the human brain, what's interesting about the human brain is we can't process 10 million, you know, bits of data in 30 minutes, or we can't see the bias. Our bias might be in our head, or one recruiter might ask questions one way and another recruiter might ask questions another way, and there is bias there, but we can't see it and we can't map those patterns because we're human. So it doesn't mean just because we've got a brain we're perfect or we're better at making decisions or we're less biased, because actually humans are quite biased in their decision making. As Andrea just pointed out, you can often have you know, facial expressions or people kind of leading or helping you in an interview. Our emotions are often biased, or our background and history often cloud our judgment. And even this morning, I actually got an email from a lady who's been studying, you know, bias on boards. And she was actually, she's from South America actually, and challenging, you know, I think it was something like 90% of all boards are white males, and there's only about 10% women, and of those women, they're all white women. So again, we know bias exists, we know it's out there, we can see it, and that's all human doing, not machine doing. That's history and legacy and systems. So yes, it's a tool. Yes, it's limited to its algorithms, but sometimes it's actually better than us and less biased than us because it's a tool, and it doesn't, you know, let things cloud its judgment. It treats everyone in the same way, on the same criteria. So I'll just look at the cons. So yeah, it's not a replacement for human intelligence. We're still going to need humans. Because it is narrow general intelligence, we have to understand those limitations about the data or about the algorithms or about the tool. And so you do need to monitor it. You do need to look at your data sources, and you do need to look at your algorithms. Are they actually doing what you want them to do? Has the machine learning gone astray? You know, has bias crept in? So a good example of this might be, we've done some machine learning and we've got a correlation, and it says, well, the older somebody is, the more experience they've got. And the machine might say, oh, well, if you're more experienced, you're a better job fit. So therefore, the older you are, the better you are. You know, so there's a bit of a leap there that says, you know, we can just do it on age because anyone who's older is better. Now, that's a leap too far. That's not true. Just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean you're better. There might be a correlation, but we don't want to hire on that basis. Definitely not in Australia, where, you know, you can't have age discrimination. So again, we've got to watch those algorithms and the machine learning and the data, and maybe correct it or adjust it if the machine's going wrong. And in a minute, I'm going to come on to something called, you know, white box and black box learning. I think you'll find that interesting. So we've talked about AI. We've talked about different types of AI. We've looked at, we're going to come on to look at AI in recruitment. I might just pause there again. Andrew, I don't know whether you want to hop on, if there's any chat questions going on or any other comments from you.
We can always count on me to have a comment. I just realised I think I've changed coloured glasses in between. There's nothing, here we go. So Martin Boyd Andrews is saying, won't bias still exist as the programmers who write the bots will hold biases also when coding the bots to interact and screen an interview?
Great question. I'm so glad you asked that. That was Andrew, was it? We're going to come
on.
Martin, thank you. Martin, we're going to come on to all that in a minute. So I might not answer that right now because you'll steal my own thunder. But that's a really key question. You know, the coding and the AI is written by people. So doesn't that introduce the bias? And also once that bias is in and in the data, you know, does it accentuate? Does it kind of create bias on bias on bias? So we are going to look at that. So hold that thought and we'll get back to that. Andrew, any other comments from you at this point?
No, nothing from me. I've got some questions lined up for the end for your panelists.
Thank you. Okay, I'll keep going and we will get to that point, Martin, so I won't forget. So AI in recruitment, what I thought I'd do for you is just map out different types of AI in recruitment. So I think when I talk to a lot of people, there's a bit of a misnomer that AI is one thing or AI is one tool or all the tools are built on the same AI. Now, the reality is there's lots of different areas of recruitment and there's lots of different AI and there's lots of different tools. So we've actually got AI tools and, you know, things like chatbots, whether that's a voice recognition on your phone or text recognition, it might be pre-funnel. So that's all about, you know, maybe social media, attracting people, where we advertise. So there's bits of AI for that. it might be in the funnel. So this is when people are coming in, when they're applying. We might have AI that helps them with their application, or it might screen their LinkedIn profile, or it might do some Q&A and answer some questions as they apply or come into the funnel. Then we've got AI around screening and selection. You know, there might be some screening questions. Have they got a visa? Can they drive? Can they work in this country? Have they got a degree? Are they a qualified engineer? Or even, you know, screening could be tests or psychometrics. Then that might lead us on to the selection. So do we rank them? How do we rank them? What scores are we taking? Who do we put through? You know, who's had an interview? What are the scores? How do they compare? So through to all that data and analytics, how do we, you know, finally make that ultimate selection, right through to onboarding, and even we could go further into development and LMS. They've all got elements of AI. There's lots of tools out there, whether it's a chatbot, whether it's a screening tool, a psychometric tool, a testing tool, a Q&A tool. So every single part of recruitment has different pieces of AI. What's clever is some of them are coming together, and some of the vendors now, you can get bits of AI that will take you all the way through a recruitment process, even though it's actually a different bit of AI or a different chatbot or piece, but it comes as one tool. So, and again, you know, we're recruiters. I'm sure you don't need reminding, but definitely millennials, but your candidates and their expectations, they like it. It's real time. They can do it on their phone. They can do it on their laptop. They can do it out of hours. You know, they can apply for a job at 11 o'clock at night, or be screened or have an interview in their time when they're ready. You know, it's not a 9 to 5. I know a big thing in the industry at the moment is candidate care. And, you know, candidates never hear back. They never get, they might phone up and leave a voicemail for a recruiter. If you've got 600 applicants for a grad scheme, you're not going to phone all 600 back. We know that. If they've got questions for you, you might not be able to get back to 600 on salary, on hours, on the job description, on the location. So all real common questions that recruiters face, and we're trying to give the candidate a really good service and get back to them. But the reality is we might have 20 of those roles on, or 50 roles on, and we're just not giving great candidate care at the moment. This is something I put together. It's a little map. It's by no means exhaustive. These were just a few that I grabbed that I thought you'd be really interested in. Some of that pre-funnel, you might not have heard of them, but for example, Beamery, they're all about where you place your adverts, you know, on social media. If we know great data programmers are all into motorbikes and they go on Facebook, that's where we're going to put our ads, because we found them and we want that person. So, you know, targeted advertising on social media, right through to at the bottom there on the left, you've got Maya and Olivia, they're chatbots. So people use these to have conversations with their candidates and answer Q&As. Right through to Impress at the top there under screening and selection. You know, very clever tools, how we can interview a candidate, how we can test a candidate, maybe do competency-based interviewing on behaviours, and take them through that whole process, right from application through to screening and selection and hiring. So we'll talk about all of those. So I did, these are not random, by the way. In those rough columns, you know, that those on the left are all about pre-funnel and funnel. Those in the middle are all about screening and selection. Those on the right, more about onboarding. And again, I've just picked out some onboarding examples where I know they've got AI built into the onboarding. There's about, that I know of, 2,700 products out there. It is a passion of mine. As I say, I've got a side website, which is hrtechmarket.com. It's free for HR. Go and have a look. There's heaps of products listed there. But these are some really cool tools that you should be looking at around AI. Now, this guy and a goldfish, I just thought I'd mention this, and you might have heard this term, but this guy, Stephen Jay Gould, he's a scientist. He extensively looked at genetics and evolution and what was related to what. His conclusion is there's no such thing as a fish. And I guess the point I wanted to make here was with AI, no two bits of AI are exactly the same, because two different vendors might have different data sets, they might have different algorithms, they might have tested it different. Like you say, they've had different programmers build it. So I think that's a big thing for you guys to take away today is just because we say AI and just because we say recruitment, it doesn't mean it's one thing or there's a homogeneous unit or everybody's using the same data sets or everybody's using the same tools. It's a bit like psychometric testing. You know, a lot of it's based on stuff from the 50s. It's been tested and tried over and over again. We know it's really robust, but one tool might use one set of psychometrics and another. And again, it's a different tool for a purpose. They do similar things, but the actual algorithms and data could be very different, which is why you need to get to know your vendor and ask some of these questions around the data and the bias. But I'll move on from there. So I might, again, I might just pause there. Andrea, any questions coming in or comments from yourself?
I'm not going to make any comments. I'm too opinionated. Sud has actually put a great question, has answered Martin Boyd's question. And I actually won't go through and read it. It's a fairly long one. But the premise is we need to treat recruiting as a science, which I think we all agree on. The days of having us as TA experts not using assessment technology and AI to, in the first place, sort of rank our delegates, our candidates at the best of times is something we really need to look at. I would be interested as we go through to look at this idea of ethical AI as well. So I'm hoping I'm putting the Impress guys on notice that I'd like to know a bit more about ethical AI.
Don't worry, we're prepared. We thought these questions would be coming, so we're going to talk about bias and ethics now. So before we move into that, again, because we've got a lot of people online and a lot of different knowledge and experience, I just thought I would revisit what's a chatbot. Now, a lot of you might know what a chatbot is already, and that's cool. Some of you might not, or you might not realize this is what a chatbot and how they work. So a chatbot, and here's a good example on the picture we've got is, you know, somebody buying tickets, you're communicating, you're getting a response. So most of us deal with chatbots all the time. If you go on your bank or your insurance company or booking airline tickets, most websites you go on, something will pop up and say, you know, have you got a question? Do you want to talk about that? Do you need some assistance? These are all chatbots. So they're basically a piece of interactive AI that knows the common questions and has the common answers. Even, you know, Siri going and finding out, you know, what's the weather like here? They're all forms of chatbot. They could be text-based, they could be word, voice-based, but they're interactive AI. A short history, well, if we think back, you know, the 1950s, they did predict, and I think they were right by 2000, that computers can pass as a human during a text conversation. I think that happens now. It's quite amusing. Sometimes people don't realize they're actually chatting to a computer and not a person when they're sorting out their insurance claim or queries. Allegis, who are a global player in recruitment, as you know, estimate 2/3 of candidates are very comfortable interacting with a chatbot, and chatbots, you know, predicted to save about 8 billion. So, you know, 2.5 billion hours by 2022, which is only next year. And that was Juniper Research. So again, you know, huge amounts of data, huge amounts of processing, but doing things that humans used to do, but they can relieve us of that kind of repetitive work or admin work or repetitive questions and answers to free us up. So I never think any of this is really about taking people's jobs. I think it's more about making our lives a lot easier, and, as I say, automating the mundane and adding value on the human touch. So I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples actually of some quite cool chatbots in recruitment. This is Sergeant Star. I don't know whether you've come across this one before. I quite like it. US military, I think he's been going a few years now, but you can actually see it's a website. So, you know, in the olden days, again, you can imagine there's all these army recruiters out there and they're answering all these questions at school fairs, you know, career fairs and college fairs, etc. Sergeant Star can do it for you himself. And it's been estimated, and as I said, I think this was maybe a year ago, you know, 11 million questions asked to date, and that's the equivalent of, you know, 55 army recruiters. So very powerful. It's a place you can go, you can ask questions, you can get answers. So that's on their careers page. Another one I really like, this is really cool. So again, you know, we're talking about AI in recruitment. It's not all about screening and selection. It's about maybe experience. The reason I like this with Hershey's, so you might be familiar with Hershey. They're a chocolate company, you know, traditional manufacturing. You kind of think chocolate manufacturing is going to be old fashioned. They're not going to be, you know, in the know. Well, this is their website. And when you go on their careers page, a lot of us have, you know, careers pages that are linked to an ATS. Often they're quite clunky. Often I have to put in, you know, 6 or 10 different things, my location, my subject, etc., 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 just to do a search and to try and find a job. This pops up. So the chatbot Hershey, and I think this is my example here, you know, hi, Rachel, you know, hi, who are you? Oh, Rachel. Oh, hi, Rachel, what are you looking for? Oh, HR. Oh, what level are you? Oh, senior. And straight away, I'm having a conversation. I haven't had to type hardly anything. And it's found me the right jobs, and it's sending me, you know, 4 senior HR jobs at Hershey. And I've only been on there probably 60 seconds. So it's a really good, cool experience. And that's their careers page. So again, I'd be interested, or I'd wonder how many people in Australia have that kind of interactive or AI on their career pages already, but it's all there. It's available. Chatbot user interaction. Guys from Impress kindly offered me some stats here. So again, part of their chatbot and AI offering is Q&A. So again, you've got a job role, you've got an organisation, you know the candidate's going to ask lots of questions. You can be ready for that. So out of 303 queries, 95.4% were answered by the chatbot. There was about 4% that couldn't be answered. They were referred to a recruiter. So people still got the answer they wanted or needed. You know, out of 150 roles, the bot correctly answered 43,000 odd questions, saving the recruitment team about 180 days. Or I would actually guess maybe those questions weren't being answered, because you know, there could have been, but in my experience, you know, recruiters are always busy. We're trying to do less with more, more with less. And it's really hard to get back to 43,000 candidates and answer their questions, because you know, you're often busy recruiting and the candidate care is not there really. So chatbot's a great answer for those Q&As. And again, this other quote is from Allegis. 2/3 of candidates, I've mentioned that earlier, happy to interact with a chatbot. Look, I really like this, so I'll talk you through it. And again, it just gives you a feel of AI in recruitment, what's happening and where it's going. So if you like, we've got AI at every single step in this process. We've got it creating the workflow, you know, linking your chatbot to your phone, to the PD, to the company. So we can build that out with the help of a chatbot. Then the interview, people can have a text interview via their phone. natural language processing to make it as realistic, which it could be pre-screening questions. I've seen AI and chatbots where you can have a mix of both. So you can have some knockout questions, have you got a visa? Are you degree qualified? Are you available to work? So you can have those kind of yes, no, or qualifying questions. At the same time, you can have competency-based questions, or it will deep dive. So if you're talking about teamwork and you answer in a certain way, or if you're talking about another, resilience, it might do probing questions. So again, that's that artificial intelligence and the machine learning, but it will, you can literally have a chat or an interview via your phone or your laptop, right through to integrating. So the AI might help with assessments. So we're going to test certain people. We're going to put certain people through to video. We want to know if they get a certain score. If they do get a certain score, they might then be passed on to the next, a face-to-face video or a short list. And yeah, the AI goes all the way through. So as I explained, it might actually be different data sets and different bits of AI and different bits of chatbot at each stage, but the tool's actually seamless and integrated. So the candidate wouldn't know that, the recruiters wouldn't know that, this is how it can be set up and used. Again, I might just pause so it's not just me talking the whole time. Andrea, any new chats in the chat room?
Tejas from Adzuna has shared with us that Adzuna, a job aggregator and job search engine, has a chatbot that zeroes in on the right roles for its job seekers. So for those of you that are looking for job boards and job aggregators, certainly check out Adzuna for that sort of functionality.
Yep. So some really powerful tools across the range. And as I said, it's not one size fits all. There's not just one AI tool. It depends whether you're looking at pre-funnel, funnel, selection, screening, onboarding, even development. I mean, a lot of the tools in screening and selection now, you can look at your own workforce. Who are our best salespeople? Who are our best call center agents? Where did we get them from? What traits do they have? What makes them good at their job? We've got the job profile, but we've also got our high performers. So again, you can look at your own internal workforce and use some of these tools to maybe help decide, we want more like that in our hiring, or these are the people we're going to progress because we know they make really good team leaders because they've got all these qualities and traits, etc. So some pretty cool stuff out there. Now, I'm just going to talk about how it all works again. So I'm going to do a little bit deep dive into the data. I'm also probably going to call on Shud to come off mute and answer some questions in a minute. And we're going to go back to Martin's question around AI and coding and bias. So I'll give it a good go explaining this and remembering, my background's HR and recruitment, not data science. So look, really, AI, machine learning, chatbots, it's all about lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of data. And you've got lots of data points. So this is a really simple graph. There's a correlation maybe between your assessment level and your number of years experience. In saying that, there's outliers. There's people with less years of experience, but they still score really well on the assessment. Whether we can correlate that and extrapolate that, but that might be just 2 bits of data. We might have 100 of those kind of bits that we're looking at with a candidate. So, it might be, we were actually looking for 100 different things that define resilience and how we score resilience, and that might be based on psychometric testing and data sets for and again how we pull this all in and learn from the machine, but also score and rank candidates. So it's very, very powerful data sets and patterns in data as well. I just thought I'd put this on again, I might be talking to the converted, but for those fairly new to some of this tech, lots of different things out there, you know, from facial recognition. I think this particular tool, you know, it captures 1.6 million features or 25,000 equivalent traditional assessments. Down the bottom there, you know, what used to take us an hour to interview 3 candidates, we can now do maybe 10 with a video interview, but the machine or the AI can actually screen, I think that's 1 million in 30 minutes. So again, the amount of data and processing just makes it really powerful tool in terms of efficiency. And those images on the right really are about, you know, it's in social media, it's in Twitter, it's in messaging, it's on your phone, it's interactive, and it goes all the way from funnel right through to offer an onboarding. Again, I'm going to try and explain this in layman's terms, but we have got Sud on standby, so if it gets a little bit complicated, he can help me explain. But this is how it normally works behind the scenes with AI or a chatbot. So you start with a training, they call it a training data set. So this might be your original data set, and you say, oh, look, here's all our senior engineers, you know, what makes them good, what traits have they got in common? You know, they might all have degrees, or they might all have X amount of experience. So we can actually go and look for those, you know, online with CVs or social media, etc. So you'll take an original training data set, and then you might augment that data and go, well, what patterns can we see here? What you know, these people all have these similar traits. You know, the leaders are all really good at comms, or they're you know, they're all really resilient, or whatever it is we're looking for that job role or our organization. So we take an original training data set, we augment the data and look at patterns. We get that machine learning out of it. As I said, the machine might say, oh, if A equals B, then we think it's C, or a good fit. We might then say, well, let's understand the candidate, let's look at the job role, let's look at the people, you know, is that a good fit? And again, we can build and apply new rules and new learning. But this is where we do have to be a bit careful, and we're going to start talking about white box and black box. And this is the algorithms, and it's kind of coming back to what Martin was saying about bias in the data and bias in possibly in the coding. And how do we know that that bias wasn't done by humans or already in the data? So, you know, a really good example is maybe back to that, what I was saying about white males on boards in South America or in Australia. You know, if we just took that as our training data set, it's a pretty limited set of data. And then if we said, oh, all the people who were good on boards look like this, well, guess what? We started with a load of data that was all white males, and there was hardly any females in there, only 10%, and those females who were in were white. So all of a sudden, our training data set's not very good. And that might lead us through all these conclusions because we didn't look at the whole of society, and we didn't include other ethnic groups or a broader set of gender on leaders. So again, you do have to be really careful. And we will come on to Martin's point about coding the algorithms. So how do we avoid bias and ensure diversity and inclusion, which I'm sure is very topical and of interest to a lot of people? We're going to start talking about this white box, black box thing. I really like this concept. So black box is basically where you put those algorithms in, you built your machine learning and your coding, and you let it go. You kind of leave it, and it will extrapolate. And there is this machine learning, and they might come to some conclusions like, you know, all electrical engineers are male who are good, you know. So, wow, that's a bit of a jump. Hang on, how did we get there? What was your algorithm? What was your data set? Now, a white box is where you actually open the box and you look at that algorithm and you look at that data and you look at those patterns. You say, hang on, is this right? are we building the right thing? Have we built bias into the algorithm, or is the algorithm actually doing what we want it to do? We're trying to hire people in a fair and ethical way and in an unbiased way. So when we're looking at data, maybe we're going to take off gender, take off name, take off accent if it's voice activated, take off age, take off, any identifiers that might put you in an ethnic group or a certain religious, patterns or whatever. So now the beauty of AI is it can give you lots of data and it can show you those patterns. So you can actually see quite often when the data or the algorithm is being biased, because you can look at those things. We can't look at them in a human or in a human brain because we don't know what somebody's thinking and they're biased, but we can do it with the data. Just put a couple of examples on here for you that you might be interested in. I've got some more towards the end. Joy here looked at gender shades. She discovered after a TED talk that, with facial recognition, it often didn't recognize her because of the color of her skin. And also often it labeled her as male. And again, you've got to go back to that original training data. What did they start with? Was there not many people of colour in there? Was there not many females in there? And so the algorithm and the data doesn't recognise her. And right through to, I believe it's Timnit Gebru. Now, this has been in the news lately because she actually worked for Google. And she was looking at bias, and I think she was looking at bias with facial recognition, but I know she left. And I think she left, I won't say under a cloud, but there was something went on there because I don't think Google liked what she was saying or what she found. So I think her and her whole team left. So that's been in the news. And I think there was a case of Amazon. This is a headline. They scrapped an AI tool because it showed bias against women. And again, I think it was their original training data set that they'd started on, this is good leaders or this is senior hires, but they're all men. And so they did build that bias in, and then the machine went on to go, well, this is what they look like, and started excluding women. So we're getting to the pointy end now, I think. I'll just cover this one last area on diversity and inclusion, and then I'm going to throw some of these curly questions to Sud. I'm so glad he's here. So look, diversity and inclusion, we ultimately, when we look at this data, we're starting to build frameworks. And I'm pleased to say it's the recruitment vendors who are leading the way in this. Possibly more in recruitment than other areas of AI and other AI machine learning tools. I think it's because obviously we're governed by laws on, diversity and inclusion. We want to do the right thing. We want to make sure it's fair. We want to make sure it's inclusive. As a HR practitioner, you want to make sure it's explainable. If somebody doesn't get the job and then they question the tool and then they question the algorithm, and we find that algorithm's got bias, that's not good. That's not good for the vendor. That's not good for us. That's not good for the organization. So it is about that white box learning, lifting the lid, having a look at the data, having a look at the patterns, having a look at the algorithms and saying, is it explainable? Is it inclusive? Is it unbiased? Is it valid? Some of these are fundamental rules of recruitment. The test has got to be valid for the role. You can't just go and test people and it bears no correlation to the work or the role. We've always had that in recruitment. Is it a fair test? You're not going to give people a heavily laden English language test when they don't have to use English in the role. It's not valid. So we can question the data and the algorithms. It goes a bit wider than that as well. We're touching on ethics here, but what about the data privacy and security? We're collecting this data for a reason. We're not going to use it for another reason. We might want to look at team diversity. We might want to look at transparency in the hiring and in the tool. So good checks to have in place. Is the data tested and validated around diversity and inclusion and the impact on different diversity groups? So we can ask that of our vendors and the tools, and these frameworks are developing. it doesn't use demographic attributes. So again, we want to make sure that it's not screening for age or gender or race or colour, etc. And we need to check those data sets and algorithms that those kind of things have been removed. The algorithm models undergo continuous testing and feedback. This is back to the white box versus black box. So again, are those built in to your vendor's tools, and are they doing that as a standard practice? There's even talk of, third-party checks. So it's somebody external to the vendor checking on their data and algorithms. And on that note, I might hand over to Sud with these questions. So Sud, I don't know whether you can come online with your video or with your mic and maybe answer these curly ones for me. Does AI, hi Sud, how are you?
Hi everyone, hi Rachel, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have a data scientist in the room, and also I'd just like to say Sud is founder and CEO of Impress, with chief data scientist, so he does know this stuff. He has built these tools and done this AI and algorithms. So Sud, if I just throw over to you those three questions, and I'm sure we'd all be really interested to hear about that AI and the bias and the systematic bias, if that applies.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I did want to say, Rachel, that I did apply for the data scientist role at the company, but they instead made me the CEO. I do rely on the team for some of the science behind the platform. We did build it together in the early days, but since then I've lost touch with the papers and the leading edge of the research, at least in the scientific community. So I do my best to keep in touch, but I'll try and answer these questions from a holistic perspective rather than just from the data science perspective. So just going on to the first one, AI can systemize bias as it applies consistently, unlike humans. This is probably worth looking at how the AI is trained, what it's allowed to do. So I think there was a question earlier from Marine Boyd that asked, that asked a similar question. So what we need to keep in mind is that if the AI is allowed to learn whatever the data is telling, then we could really have all sorts of unpredictable problems as to what decisions the AI can make. The best practices would include setting some ground rules on what the AI can do. So when you're building these algorithms, when you're building software, you need the software to follow some basic principles on which it can make decisions. Within the space of recruitment and selection, it applies to admissions in university, it applies to selection for promotions as well. In all kinds of selection decisions, you need to have certain basic principles on which decisions can be made. These principles are defined either in two areas. One is regulations, government regulations, and the second one is IO psychology. So there's a whole field of industrial organizational psychology, which we probably many of us are probably familiar with to a large extent, which talks about competencies, which talks about facets that you can evaluate for on candidates to evaluate them for the job. And both of these areas, whether it be regulation, whether it be IO psychology, bar you essentially, or they define that software should not be looking at attributes other than what is relevant for the job. So I think the key word there is relevancy. As long as your software and your AI is programmed to operate based on these principles, and the AI learning that happens within strictly defined areas of the tool, then you've got something that can work. Then you're minimizing the risk of systematic bias in the system. Now, let me give you an illustration of that. So some of the things that we need to evaluate for on candidates when we're selecting them for a role would have to do with relevant experience, for instance. It would have to do with qualifications that the candidate has. So these are very explainable. These are easily seen as relevant for the role. You don't want an AI algorithm saying something of the sort that, Rachel gave an example earlier, that says that, the older the candidate, the more experienced they're likely to be. You don't want that age attribute as a variable in your decision making at all. So the engineers building this software have to keep those irrelevant attributes out of the decision making process. So that can be designed into the system. All of this can be designed into the system, and good AI tools will tell you what data they're using to make these decisions and to spot patterns. So yes, it is possible to make systems that are that minimize the risk of having systematic bias in the system, and you should definitely ask your vendor more about how they're doing that.
Look, I
feel
think,
free to, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think you've answered both questions, but I'll ask this question in kind of a different way, which is, because it's coded by humans, isn't bias built in because all humans have bias? So again, I'm not sure whether it's the same answer, but whether you can talk us through that or give us an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the important thing is that those humans writing the software have to be aware of these principles. So you definitely can't have a computer scientist that knows nothing about how recruiting is done or what are the best practices in recruiting. I think one of the big watch brands says that before you break the rules, you have to master them, right? So you can't have a computer scientist writing code on recruiting decisions without actually knowing what is the research that has been put into this field by by practitioners, by researchers over decades. So they have to know how competency-based selection works. They have to know how skill-based selection works. They have to be aware of the issues around bias that can creep into systems when you rely solely on the data. So I think it is really important that the computer scientists who are coding this know what they're doing. They know the rules of engagement. They're good at software, but they're building software for a particular purpose, which is recruiting in this case. So they need to know enough about recruiting best practices before they go ahead and write code for it.
Yeah, and I know we had a couple of chats, Sud, and one of the things I think you mentioned to me in passing, that some of your AI had actually spotted patterns and bias in recruiters. So, you're checking all this data all the time and you're going, hang on, this recruiter's marking this way and that recruiter's marking a different way. Same role, same interview, same questions, and they're actually scoring it differently. So things like that is actually thrown up by the AI and the data, that human, whether you want to call it human error or human bias, that you wouldn't normally see, but the AI spotted it and said, why is this different? And then you can go back to the recruiters and say, hey guys, did you know you're actually evaluating and assessing in a different way? So you can build in that kind of those feedback loops.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right that the AI needs training data to learn from. And this training data in the example you gave is provided by the recruiters. So the recruiters train the system by rating candidates' answers. And then this is used to automate the evaluation of answers by the algorithms. So the recruiters essentially rate the answers based on guidelines that are given to them, that this is how you're supposed to rate this kind of an answer because this is what the company is looking for in terms of skills and competencies. Now, we found in one of the cases that different recruiters, so this company hadn't spent enough time probably crafting the guidelines or training the recruiters, but it's great because they were able to spot it using the system. We found that multiple recruiters were rating the same answers from candidates in a different way. When something like that happens, it's a chance to retrain your recruiters and get on the same page as to what the organization is looking for in terms of these skills and competencies. So this actually happened with one of the 50 companies we work with, and the results were fantastic after that. You had very consistent ratings, and this was seen as a win for the company.
Great, thank you. And so, look, I think you have answered all that for me, but just for the audience out there, maybe just touch on that last question. So does all AI amplify existing biases? I think it's that thought of, if there's bias in the machine, it's kind of just builds, it's like, what is good, or what does good look like? And then it's kind of, it amplifies and amplifies and amplifies. So, diverse candidates or people from certain groups will never have a chance because the machine's so biased. So can you, I guess, talk us through that one as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about bias is that it's usually seen as a negative thing. And the important thing is that humans, of course, are continuously spotting patterns in the data we see every day. We're always spotting patterns, and that becomes our bias. And a lot of us probably feel that our biases lead to good results because these are things we've learned going through life, making decisions. And in some cases that may be true, right? If somebody's hiring a lot of people day in and day out, they're making these decisions and they've gotten good at what how to select the right person. They may have developed their own principles, and that can start to be seen as bias. So I think we have to be careful about what we think of bias as. We don't necessarily need to discard all the learnings as humans we've had. Now, yes, if the AI is not engineered the right way, it can amplify biases. But if it's engineered the right way, again, based on what the AI is evaluating, it does not need to amplify the bias. Now, does all AI amplify bias? That's a bit like saying that the computer will do what the software tells it to do. So the systems that we may be using today, which are looking for certain keywords, and that's technically not AI. When systems look for keywords, that's been done for 10 plus years by ATSs already. Now, even by looking for those keywords, you've programmed in some bias, and actually that's not a great way to do things when you're looking for, when you're evaluating candidates for selection. So same applies with AI. As long as you build it based on the right principles, and you make sure that the data is being audited, that the whatever the algorithm is doing is being audited, and it stays consistent with those principles, you've got a solid process, and you've got a solid system which will allow you to spot biases in time if any develops, and you can solve for them because you can spot them.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to pause with you there, Sud, because I know we're going to get to you again on the panel. I am going to keep moving because we've just got a bit more to get through, and I do want some time for the panel, and I know we're down to the last 30 minutes, so that's gone quick. So I'll just go through this last few areas. So we've talked about bias. I wanted to talk about bias in the data, which we've done. We've also talked about bias in people, which we've also done, and I'm biased in humans as well, which are not perfect, possibly compared to the data and the AI, which will maybe expose the bias and the patterns. I'm just going to touch on ethics now. Again, I've done a fair bit of research before this masterclass. Here's a few people. I won't read out all their names, but doing some leading edge research in AI and all around things like gender and color and race and name and age. So feel free to check some of that out. It's not all in recruitment. Some of it's more general than recruitment, but still really good articles and research, some linked with the Harvard Business Review, etc. With ethics, I might actually, sorry, Sud, I might call you back. Again, I'll just go through this. So I see this as slightly different from bias. Ethics is probably a broader umbrella. Bias sits under ethics. But I guess there's all these questions around the data, you know, as well, like what about privacy? What about personal attributes? You know, if you've tracked somebody on social media and you know their social habits, or if they've made political comments, or they've got a certain lifestyle, or they've got a disability, how do we, you know, what is the ethics around all this, you know, data storage or privacy, or capturing data for one thing and it possibly being used for another, and then that bottom row, you know, candidate consent, using their data. Is it fair? Is it accurate? Is it open source? Can it be audited by third parties? And does it fit into the law, you know, laws around traditional hiring? So sort of might just throw to you again around this whole area of ethics as well.
Definitely. Yeah,
it's a big question. I know it's a big question, but
yeah. So, but the thing is that some people in the field have been really thinking about this, and these are some of the things they've come up with when you're considering the question of ethics around recruiting or AI in recruiting. So this is what the experts are saying, and this is what, you know, we as users of AI or builders of AI system need to keep in mind. The first one is really describing high level what are the ethics issues that come out of using AI in recruitment. And what it's really saying is if you use AI systems, you have to really think about the data that's going into it. So uh, are there going to be specific considerations for employers if they have access to personal attributes of someone or lifestyle and activities of someone, which they can probably which, you know, some AI algorithms can get from social media, for example, people posting pictures from a party and that being public knowledge because they just haven't set up the privacy settings to protect that information from the public. And the third part is, of course, disability. So personal attributes would consist of, you know, your sexual orientation, certain other things which are genuinely personal about you, which have nothing to do with the role. And disabilities, of course, it's another sensitive subject. Do you want your employer to be aware of these things, and what questions or what challenges does that pose for the employer in terms of decision making? So if I were to comment on this as someone who's a practitioner in the industry, I would say that the best practice for AI algorithms would be actually keep distance from most of this information and not use it in decision making. Some of this may be needed for meeting diversity goals. Sometimes you do need to collect the data, but most of this information does not have a place in the AI algorithm itself. So that's something that we probably need to ask our vendors. We need, as practitioners and as builders of AI systems, we need to be responsible that this data is not going into the decision making or the AI algorithm itself. At Impress AI, we do not use any information from social media. We don't think that is relevant. We think that should be a protected space as long as you know it's not open by the candidate. That's not a territory we like to get into. And on the other two areas, only to the extent of it being needed for meeting diversity goals, it's important. But beyond that, we have to be very careful, and probably laws will evolve around some of these areas. The laws generally exist, but as more and more laws around AI and more work is done. For example, there's work happening in the EU to come up with a broad set of laws around AI. These things will become more and more transparent and common knowledge. The second part, of course, I'll try and move through this faster. The second part of this is what can you do in terms of best practices to make sure your AI for recruitment is ethical? And again, these are best practices recommended by practitioners in the industry. Educating and obtaining consent from candidates, telling them what the system is doing with their data, and being transparent about how the algorithm works, what it's looking for. Consent is, of course, #1 requirement around the world now. That's the gold standard. You need consent that can be actually read and digested by a candidate. It should be easy to read. It should not be embedded inside a long, difficult to read document, as has been accepted for a long time. So you need genuine consent, not ignorant consent from candidates. The second is investing in systems that optimize fairness and accuracy. And this can really come from putting the thought into configuring your systems of recruitment. So for example, when we work with a broad range of clients, and we find that a lot of times people who are involved in human selection, in selection of candidates for roles, they do not have a clear set of competencies that they're looking for. A lot of them operate based on their own interpretation of the job description without a common and a clear understanding of what the role requires. So one of the starting points is to start investing in that repository of knowledge internally first, and setting standards, what roles actually require what top skills and competencies. And that then starts going into software or systems that you use. So that's really important. And then the third is open source and third-party audits. Some of the industry practitioners suggest that vendors who use AI can make their systems open source so that they can be audited by the community. Now, this is a controversial suggestion, of course, because once you open source your technology, it becomes very hard to monetize it in many cases. But there are still models around it. Again, we'll have to see how this evolves. But third-party audits is a real option. This is, of course, continuous. This has been seen in the accounting industry when you want the market to trust the data.
I was just going to say the same, that it exists already in accounting, doesn't it? That you have to have a third-party auditor come in. It doesn't necessarily mean you lose your IP, but somebody's still taking a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely something that's looking like it'll happen. It'll become a commonplace very, very soon. And then the last one, of course, same laws as traditional hiring, right? So you want your software to be following the same principles, the same laws. This is something we spoke about earlier when we were answering a previous question. And this has to do with laws around diversity, laws around what you can be looking for. And there's a lot of knowledge that is being built into software already from these laws.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to whiz on through the rest of the slides now, because I do want some time at the end for the panel, and I do want lots and lots of questions. So please get in the chat room and start putting your questions if we haven't answered anything, or if we've made something a little bit more confusing, just let us know. Just moving on, I think it's really important to talk about the candidate experience. I know I've been using AI and some chatbots now in recruitment this last year. I've actually found it really good. I guess my original thought was, get an interview by a robot, or it's going to be cold. What would they know? It's going to have bias, etc. I'm pleased to say the opposite was probably true. That actually the candidate experience has been really good. Candidates actually really like it. The fact they get an instant response, the fact they can chat with somebody, the fact that they get an interview, that was my biggest takeout. That, again, traditional maybe grad scheme, you've got 600 applicants, you might only interview 20, or even video interview, 50. So most, 550 people don't even get an interview. How fair is that? So all of a sudden, the fact you can interview all 600 and they're on the same questions with the same tool, with the same lack of bias, we take off their name, we take off their gender, we take off their age, we might take off their accent. All of a sudden, that levels the playing field from 600 and somebody looking at the CVs to everybody gets a go, everybody gets an interview, and you're all being interviewed in the same way by the same tool and scored across the same platform. So I think, it does help trust and inclusivity, feedback and connection. We have found, these are some quotes, You know, candidates do like it. Some like it because they found it well structured. Others liked it because it was new and different. Others liked it because it was fast, and you know, they found out whether they were through in a week rather than 3 months, and they found it enjoyable and engaging. So often it's, you know, really high participation. I'm talking in the 90s or top 90s. Completion rates, and also really great feedback when you ask candidates, how did you find that? They'll tell you, and it's good. So this was just, again, from Impress, 86% net promoter score, so 4 or above, 4-star rating out of 1,000 candidates. I think that was on one particular campaign. Again, I'll whiz through this: benefits and ROI. Some recent research, you know, 52% of talent acquisition leaders are saying that it's really hard to identify the right candidate from these huge talent pools. As I mentioned earlier, you know, we've done a great job of creating job boards and ATSs, which means everybody from all over the world can now apply, but then we want to treat them all fairly and equally and give them feedback and give them every opportunity to get through. So lots of applicants and lots of people to process. 56% of leaders say their hiring volumes are likely to increase. I know in Australia at the moment we've got a bit of a talent shortage, so people might disagree with that stat, but I still think most recruitment teams are working flat chat. They've got a lot of vacancies and a lot of candidates, and they've got a lot of people to get through and process in a fair, unbiased, equal way. And 66% of recruitment teams stay in the same size, but maybe their workloads getting bigger. Benefits, I'm not going to read every word here, but you know, lots of benefits across the organisation. Productivity gains and efficiency gains for recruiters, the enterprise, you know, helping your employer brand. If you're getting back to candidates quicker, if you're answering their questions, they're having a much better experience. It's engaging, real-time responses, strong information, FAQs for candidates, and for the org overall, you know, cost savings, better candidate engagement and data-driven decisions. So lots of benefits, lots of ROI. Again, I'm going to share this slide deck, so if people do want a copy, let me know. Put a note in the chat, or at the end, there's my email, but our intention is we'll share this masterclass with everyone, and also we've recorded it, so we'll put it on YouTube. And people can have access, or if you did want me to run this masterclass for you and your team, your wider HR team, just let me know and we can potentially come and run it as an internal workshop for you. So yeah, ROI really stacks up if you're looking at accuracy, if you're looking at net promoter scores in terms of engagement and experience. Candidates feel, you know, 99.9% feel reviewed and informed, and it's saving, I think this was just one campaign, just one client, a telecom client, saved 790 hours of recruiter time on a recruitment campaign. How to appoint your vendors. Again, I'm going to move pretty fast because I do want to get to questions. You know, often it's about sharing your recruitment process with them in the first place, so they understand how you recruit, what you're doing, what are your problems, what are you trying to solve. They obviously want to know the role, so sharing the job description, talking about those competencies, talking about what makes a good salesperson. You know, it might be evergreen roles, it doesn't have to be evergreen roles, so those are roles that you can never quite fill, as in you're always hiring salespeople or you're always hiring call centre staff. But again, you might have identified over the years, well, we know this is what makes good call centre staff, and this is how we currently test them in an assessment centre or in a video interview. How can we put that into an AI tool? So choosing your selection criteria against the role for your ideal candidate, and then through to a proposed process flow that might include, you know, Q&As, it might include interview, it might include psych assessment, it might include through to shortlist. So, you know, checking that the AI tool can do those kind of things will help you with that flow. Again, I won't read through this, but you know, it's around knowing what you're looking for. Is it cost saving? Is it time saving? Is it experience? So having a clear indication before you go to the vendor what you really want to change about your recruitment. Time to hire, effort to hire. I do love this slide. This gives you a good feeling for where the chatbot and the AI can be involved and how it is involved. So everything from an introduction, it helps with your employer branding, it can give role information and Q&A, it might help screen CVs or do some basic screening questions. That could be a chatbot or an interview. Then job fit questions, you know, a bigger interview. If they're not meeting criteria, then typically, you know, end of interview and they're out, but they could get feedback and Q&As on their feedback. If they meet the criteria, they might move on to psychometrics or competency based, end of the interview, and again, candidate feedback and Q&A. So candidates do get a lot of feedback. There's a lot of data. Recruiters get a lot of dashboards. Here's some metrics. Again, I won't read them all to you, but there's over 50 metrics, for example, with the Impress tool. So, you know, everything from speed, experience, efficiency, diversity, saving, it's all built in. So you can measure those things and get reports on that. Sample questions. Again, I won't read through them all, but I might leave them on the screen and we might call on our panel now. So I'll invite Sud back. We've also got Daniel Sherrington, who's also from VP Sales and Marketing from Impress. And Andrea, I don't know whether you can tell us some of the questions from the chat or whether we need to use some of these questions, but I'll throw those open to the group.
There's no questions on the chat. So I suggest you do some of these sample questions. But yeah, if people put stuff in the chat, I'll interrupt, let Rachel. Always a pleasure to do.
Right. So feel free, guys, to get involved, ask your questions, anything about AI and AI in recruitment we haven't covered today that you still wanted to know, or anything you'd like to ask a vendor or a data scientist, because we've got them in the room. Look, I put together these questions. I thought they would be useful for you guys to take away with you when you're looking at vendors. These are good to ask of any vendor, but we might ask them of Sud and Dan. I'm not sure whether Dan's online. I know he's had a few internet problems this week, so if he can't join us, it's okay. I think the first one's a good one. Do they only work, does AI chatbots only work on certain type of roles? So I think people often think of AI for bulk recruitment or grad recruitment or army recruitment. You know, so what's your experience there? Sud, you mentioned you got about 50 clients across APAC. What would you say is the case?
Yeah, so there are certain areas where you might expect a higher ROI just to start with. And that does include high volume applications. So if there's a role where you're receiving lots of applications, you're probably going to see a high ROI in terms of using AI-based decision-making systems there. So that's a good point to start with. But what we see in the industry is that once you discover the benefits, once you've implemented that system for those high volume application cases, you start to identify that most other roles where even if you're not getting lots of applications, but you still need that objectivity in decision making, we start to see that the usage of that AI spread throughout the roles, and very soon you start to see that roles from 0 to somewhere around 8 to 10 years of experience also we've seen high usage of these automation systems. I think somewhere in the senior roles where the mode of recruitment becomes primarily headhunting, that's where certain kinds of AI-based decision making may not be as useful, because those roles come with a lot of nuance. Those roles come with a lot of relationship building and making the candidate feel very, very important. I think one thing we have to remember is that we need to see AI as an enabler. We need to and as a problem solver, right? Because if you don't have a problem where well-trained human recruiters can handle the workload, and they do a great job of evaluating candidates for roles because they've been trained very well in this, it's their career. Um, and as long as that is affordable, you don't necessarily need AI for everything. So AI is an enabler and a problem solver where you have the problem. And a lot of times this problem begins when you're getting a lot of candidate applications, or you are sourcing a lot of candidate applications by reaching out to people through your CRM, and you need AI to do a good job of that qualification of candidates. Because we've seen that when when some recruiters are receiving a lot of applications, they're handling 40 to 50 different roles in different kinds of job families. They struggle to be thorough in their qualification process of candidates. So that's a perfect example of where you need AI to help that recruiter do their job thoroughly and well.
And I've seen that a lot. I go into a lot of organisations and help them review their TA function, and I have actually seen that a lot where you've got a couple of recruiters, they've got 50 vacancies each, they're getting 20, 30, 40, 50 applicants per role. They can, let's say they've got 60 applicants for that role, they can only give that role 1 hour that week because they're on a 38-hour week, and they're literally giving each candidate 30 seconds or 60 seconds. Now that might be enough to read a CV, but it's not enough to give them a good experience or answer their questions or even interview them. So the recruiters are really stretched and are just literally moving bits of paper around. And so, the candidate's not getting a decent experience, but more than that, they're probably not getting a decent go because people haven't got the time to really review them because they've got so many vacancies on and so many applicants, and they're just busy shifting bits of paper around. And again, I've seen it where a lot of it falls to the hiring manager. Again, because the recruitment team is quite small, so it's kind of leader-led hiring. And again, that huge workload of trawling through a PDF of 60 CVs by the hiring manager. So I have seen both, and I've seen where AI can really help some of that large workloads. So I'm going to keep going with the questions, and then I'll stop a few minutes short of the end just to wrap up, and got a couple of offers at the end for people, so do stick around to the end. How accurate are chatbots in screening? Now, bearing in mind you work for an AI company, but how can you judge accuracy? How do you say, well, we know we're accurate? Where does that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course we are biased, so I won't comment on how good a certain system works against others. But I think the principle to keep in mind here again is you're probably doing a good job to define accuracy if you're running two processes in parallel to figure out how the system operates against a purely human-based process or a purely manual process. So the way we think about it is when there are certain recruiters recruiting for the same role and they're evaluating applications in their traditional way, they produce a shortlist, and then the platform also produces a shortlist. Now, if both of those teams, one is an AI team, of course, and the other one is completely human-based, if those teams are operating on the same rules, same principles as to what is required for the role, and doing their best to ignore information that is not relevant. For example, the name is not important, the address is not important, the photo is not important, right? So as long as both the systems are operating on the same principles, you'd get the same outcomes, technically speaking, but you'd expect the machine to do it much faster. What we do find, though, is that the machine very often spots candidates who would otherwise have been rejected by the recruiters in the first go. And sometimes, this has happened fairly often with us, that our clients would tell us that in the shortlist they saw candidates get the candidates saw candidates come through whom they would have rejected otherwise. And an example of that could be that let's say you're selecting a candidate for a university graduate role, one of those management associate roles. And this is a common example, so probably I think most of us can identify with it. And the recruiters or the hiring process may not have explicitly defined GPA as a factor, because it shouldn't matter, for example, right? There's no reason to say that people with a lower GPA but more experience can't do the job as well. So the recruiters may inherently look at the GPA.
Sorry, so GP is what, grade point average?
Grade point average, yeah. The overall grade point average that the candidate got in the university. So the recruiters, without having it as an explicit factor in selection, may still look at it and may still decide to reject the candidates who don't have a high GPA. But the algorithm, on the other hand, the software, on the other hand, will continue to ignore that, and it will focus only on competencies. So because of that happening, we have seen examples where the software will pop up candidates who would otherwise not have been selected by the team. And again, just to make my last comment, as long as you're following the right principles based on IO psychology, based on principles that can be demonstrated to be relevant to the role, you will have, we've seen this through practice as well, you'll have a system that consistently produces results which are aligned to human zone selection following the same principles, but do it faster.
Yeah, great, thank you. Now, I am conscious about time. I think we've just got about 6 minutes left. So I might throw one more question at you, Sud, and potentially give you 2 minutes to answer. So a little bit unfair. We have talked about diversity and inclusion. We've talked about bias. Just really interested, what about candidates with a disability? So what if, I don't know, it's a chatbot text and they're blind or something like that? How do you get around those kind of situations?
Yeah, that's so as a society, of course, globally, people are working on better accessibility for everyone, right? That's a core principle. That's a core principle of equity. You adjust your systems to accommodate for people who are less privileged in some of these areas. So to answer within that specific boundary of let's say looking at the at visual impairment, there are now a lot of accommodations for people with that. Of course, it's important to ask the vendor how they handle it, but within web-based systems, which most of the software we're talking about is, you have this web access initiative, for instance, which basically says that a lot of our hardware, including our phones and our laptops, come built in with screen readers. So these are software that that are preloaded into your device that read off the screen, right? They read whatever is written on the screen in a certain way, and it allows you to navigate that system or that software by using your voice. So a person with visual impairment would be able to interact with the system through voice, for example, as long as the software, from the vendor, that selection software follows rules, again, under the web access initiative. So that's a very specific example, and people have worked on accommodations for that. There are similar accommodations that people have worked on for, hearing impairment, or for example, dyslexia. You have special fonts that are easier to read for people with dyslexia. And you're able to give more time to those people as long as that disability is declared. So hopefully that gives you some examples.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you. So for everyone out there, thank you for staying to the end. We're just going to wrap up. I have got a couple of offers out there, so do stick around to the end. But some really great questions there in that slide. As I said, we will share this slide deck with all the attendees. I've got more questions in the appendices as well if you want more, but I think it is a rapidly evolving area. Thank you, Sud, by the way. Sud is CEO, and I know he's a very busy guy, so I feel very honoured and privileged that he could join us today and answer all those questions.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So sample questions there. Just to summarise and wrap up, AI is a tool. That's all it is. We've always used tools in recruitment, whether it's your website, your careers page, your ATS, it is another tool. So it does have limitations, but for someone who's used some AI-driven tools this last year, I'd say it's a great tool, and it can really help recruiters. It can help with time, efficiency, but it can also help with candidate experience. And I think one of the biggest takeouts for me personally is it can help with equity. So, you know, the fact that a lot of these tools do take off the name, the gender, the age, the location, the address, maybe even grade point average, if those things are found to bias, it actually creates a level playing field for a lot of candidates who wouldn't have even got an interview before, or wouldn't have even got in the door and had a test before. They'd been knocked out really at the start of the funnel. It can be used to enhance and improve decision making. We get a lot of data, you know, there's always dashboards and data, and so when you are making these decisions, you can see where it's come from. And like we said before, it's very engaging. I do think the candidates actually quite enjoy it and get a good experience out of it, and possibly get an interview or get tested where they wouldn't have done before in the traditional methods. And I think those ethics and frameworks around ethics and auditing, you know, algorithms and checking by third, it's all coming. So that the better companies, the better vendors are doing all this already, but do ask those questions and check. We're literally a minute to go, so we've had our panel discussion. I'd like to say thank you. I'd definitely like to say thank you to Impress. I've been thinking of doing this masterclass for a while now, and a white paper, etc. They actually made it all possible, so I'd really like to thank them, because they've literally paid me for my time to put this on, so you guys can have this masterclass and free training. So thank you so much. Impress are in Australia. They started in Singapore and headquarters are there, but they do have a whole team in Australia. So if you're interested in a demo, I know they're happy. If you want to see some AI in action or a chatbot in action, reach out to the Impress guys. I think it's Maria and Alex in Australia. I'm sure they'd be happy for you to get in touch, or you can get in touch by me. I'm going to do a workbook following this masterclass. So if you'd like the workbook will have a lot more in it. As I said, I did do a lot of research and a lot of reading. I do have a reading list. So reach out, put a note in chat, send me an email. My email's on there. Actually, I think it should be admin@hillconsulting.com.au, not info, or just Rachel@hillconsultinghrs.com.au. Happy to run this masterclass for others. So if you are part of a HR team and you think your team will benefit, let me know, and let's have a chat. And finally, what I do is HR tech reviews and HR TA reviews. So if you'd just like a chat in general about that, how we transition a TA team from maybe paper-based automated to automated, I'm always happy to talk and have a chat. So just let me know. Thanks, guys. Thanks for stopping around to the end. It is recorded. It'll be on YouTube. We'll share the slides, and I hope you got a lot out of today. I think that was a real deep dive, and as far as I know, it's the first type of masterclass in Australia. So thanks for attending. Thanks for investing in your own lifelong learning, and I'm sure I'll see you all again soon. Thank you. And thanks Emma. I'm seeing all the chats now, so thanks for all your messages, everybody. Thank you, Alex. You're all welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If there was any comments or anything else you want to know about or hear, just drop me a line or put them in the comments section. And I'll wrap up now. I'll probably catch up with with Michelle and Andrea. Thank you so much for helping, and I'll catch up with you all shortly. I'll send you another Zoom. Thank you. Bye bye.